The morning I finished the last coat of paint on the wraparound porch, I stood back and cried. Not sad tears. The kind that come when you've poured every late night, every skipped vacation, every dollar you could scrape together into something real, and it's finally standing in front of you, solid and breathing. 3 years, 41 weekends, $112,000 of my own money. The house on Clover Ridge Lane wasn't just wood and drywall. It was proof that I existed, that I mattered, that I could build something from nothing with my own 2 hands. My mother had called it foolish when I first proposed the idea. Her parents had left the land to her and my father years ago, a wide lot in a quiet part of Ashland that sat untouched through a decade of family disagreements about what to do with it. I was 26 and working as a junior project manager at a construction firm. I had savings, ambition, and a vision. I told my parents I would finance the entire build if they'd let me design it and live in it. We'd keep the deed in their names for now, just until I could refinance and take it over formally. It was supposed to be temporary. A technicality. My parents trusted me, I trusted them, and for a long time, it worked exactly the way I'd imagined. My brother had never shown the slightest interest in that lot. He'd barely set foot on it in 20 years. He lived 40 minutes away with his wife in a house they'd bought with a generous loan from my parents that, as far as I knew, had never been fully repaid. When construction on Clover Ridge started, he came out exactly once, walked around for 10 minutes, said it looked fine, and left. His wife, who I had spent years trying to genuinely like, made a comment about the kitchen layout being a little ambitious, and then helped herself to the lemonade my mother had brought. That was the full extent of their investment in everything I was building. So when my company offered me a promotion that came with a small team and a real salary jump, my parents insisted on throwing a dinner to celebrate. It was a Thursday in late October. My mother had cooked for 2 days straight. The table was set with the good dishes, the ones she only pulled out for Christmas and graduations. My father had bought a bottle of wine he'd been saving for what he called a proper reason. My brother and his wife were coming. Their 2 kids were coming. It was going to be a real family night, the kind we hadn't had in a while, warm and easy and full of things to be grateful for. I was in the kitchen helping my mother plate the roasted chicken when I heard my brother's wife mention something to my father in the next room. I wasn't paying attention at first, just background noise beneath the sound of the oven timer, and my mother humming to herself. Then I heard the words "the property transfer" and my hands went still. I set down the serving spoon. She was speaking in the low, reasonable tone she used when she wanted something to sound like common sense. My father was nodding slowly. I stepped to the edge of the doorway and listened, and what I heard rearranged everything I thought I understood about my family. The paperwork, she was saying, was already drawn up. They'd spoken to an attorney. Given the current market in Ashland, the land and the house together were appraised at just over $400,000. If my parents signed the property over to my brother, as the eldest, it would protect the asset from any estate complications down the road. It was the smart thing, the responsible thing. My brother stood next to her, nodding like this was a plan they'd arrived at together over careful, caring deliberation. I walked into the room. The 3 of them looked at me the way people look when they've been caught doing something they planned to finish before you noticed. "What property transfer?" I said. My brother started with a version of my name, the one he'd used since we were kids when he wanted to manage me. I held up a hand. "The house on Clover Ridge," I said. "Are you talking about signing it over to him?" My father opened his mouth and closed it. My mother appeared in the doorway behind me, still holding a dish towel, her face going carefully blank the way it did when she was trying to stay out of something. My brother's wife straightened up and looked at me with genuine patience, which was somehow more infuriating than anger would have been. She said that of course I would be taken care of, that it wasn't about pushing me out, that the family needed to think about the future, about what made sense legally, about how to structure things so everyone was protected. "I poured every dollar I had into that house," I said. "And we're so grateful for that," she said. "You'll always have a place there. A place there. In the house I designed. In the house I financed. In the house that still smelled like the primer I rolled onto the bedroom walls, with my own arms aching at 2 in the morning because I couldn't afford to hire someone to do it faster." My brother said my name again, softer this time. He said I was misunderstanding the situation, that nothing had been signed yet, that this was just a conversation. But it wasn't just a conversation. I could see it in the way he wouldn't quite meet my eyes. I could see it in the way his wife had already shifted to talking about timeline, about when it might make sense to finalize things. This had been decided somewhere I wasn't invited. The dinner, the good dishes, the saved bottle of wine, all of it suddenly felt like a set I'd wandered onto without knowing my lines. I went home that night without eating. I sat at the kitchen table in the house on Clover Ridge and looked at the walls I had chosen, and the light fixtures I had installed, and the floors I had refinished by hand, and I felt something cold and specific settle in my chest. Not grief, exactly. Something sharper, something that wanted to be useful. I opened my laptop, and I started pulling files. I had everything. That was the thing my brother and his wife hadn't accounted for. I was a project manager by trade. Documentation wasn't a habit for me, it was a reflex. I had every contractor invoice going back to the first week of the build. I had the original architectural plans with my signature on every revision. I had email threads with the city permitting office, with the electrician, with the plumber, with the flooring supplier. I had bank statements showing 41 separate transfers from my personal account to the construction fund. I had a folder on my computer labeled Clover Ridge Development that contained 3 years of my life organized by date, category, and amount. I also had something else. A conversation I'd almost forgotten about. 8 months into construction, when a dispute with the roofing contractor threatened to delay everything, my brother had called me out of nowhere and offered to help. Not financially. He'd offered to talk to the contractor on my behalf, to smooth things over, he said. I'd been so stressed, I'd said yes without thinking. What I hadn't known was that my brother had recorded that call with the contractor, and somewhere in it, he'd referred to the property as our family's investment. I'd thought nothing of it at the time. Now I pulled up every voicemail, every text, every email he'd ever sent me about the house. I was looking for any thread he might try to pull. What I found instead was a chain of text messages between his wife and my mother that my mother had forwarded to me by accident 4 months earlier, meaning to send them to a group chat. She'd sent them to me alone and then immediately followed up with a string of nevermind texts that I hadn't thought twice about until now. I read through the original thread and felt my stomach drop. They had been discussing the property for much longer than I realized. My sister-in-law had been planting the idea with my mother for nearly a year, framing it differently each time. Sometimes it was about protecting my parents' estate. Sometimes it was about fairness to my brother, who had sacrificed so much for the family in ways I couldn't appreciate. Sometimes it was about me, presented with warmth and concern. The suggestion that carrying such a large asset alone was too much pressure for someone my age, that my parents were actually doing me a favor by taking it off my hands. I sat with that for a long time. Then I called my friend Diane. Diane had gone to law school while I was learning how to read blueprints. She worked in civil litigation and had the kind of organized, bloodless intelligence that made opposing attorneys physically uncomfortable. I had helped her move twice, driven her to the emergency room once, and listened to more case debriefs than I could count. She answered on the second ring, and I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then she said, "Send me every document you have. Tonight." 2 weeks passed. I went to work. I answered my mother's texts about nothing in particular. I had dinner with my father once and watched him be normal in the way people are normal when they've compartmentalized something they don't want to examine. My brother called once and I let it go to voicemail. I did not bring up Clover Ridge. I was building something, and I needed time. What Diane found when she went through my files was cleaner than either of us expected. The financial contribution was irrefutable. $112,000 over 3 years, traceable to the penny. But more than that, she found something that changed the entire shape of the situation. Buried in the original agreement my parents had signed with the city when the construction permit was issued, there was a co-applicant line. My name. My parents had added me as co-applicant on the permit because the city had required a licensed professional of record for a project of that size. I had signed it. I had my copy. And Diane said that in the state of North Carolina, that signature, combined with documented financial contribution of that magnitude, created a strong foundation for a claim of equitable interest in the property. They couldn't just sign it away. Not cleanly. Not without a fight that would cost them significantly more than the property was worth in time, legal fees, and the kind of family rupture that doesn't fully close. I let that sit in me like something warm. I want to be clear that I thought carefully about what came next. I am not someone who moves toward confrontation naturally. I had spent years in my family, being the one who absorbed tension, who redirected difficult conversations, who made peace not because I believed peace was always right, but because I was good at it and no one else seemed willing to try. I had spent years believing that being useful and being kind were the same thing. I was learning, in those quiet 2 weeks, that they were not. My brother's son was turning 1 year old. The party was being held at their house, a Saturday afternoon in November, with catered food and a balloon arch, and more people than I could count invited. My brother's wife had been planning it for months. She'd sent the digital invitation with a Canva design that included the words "Celebrating Our Greatest Joy" in script font. I had received mine and replied, "Yes, I'll be there," because at the time I still believed in showing up. I did show up. I was on time. I brought a gift. Diane came with me. I introduced her to my mother near the food table as an old friend, which was true. I watched my sister-in-law hold court across the lawn, laughing and guiding people by the elbow from group to group, perfectly at ease. My brother stood near the grill looking pleased with everything. My parents sat with some older relatives under a canopy. It was a clear afternoon, still warm enough to be outside without a coat. I waited until the birthday cake had been cut and most people had plates in their hands, and the noise level had risen to something comfortable and ambient. Then I walked over to where my brother and his wife were standing with another couple they were friendly with, and I said, quietly, that I needed a few minutes with both of them. My brother's wife looked at me with an expression that was almost fond, like she expected I was about to offer some kind of concession. My brother said sure, like a man who had already won. We moved to the side of the house where it was quieter. Diane came with me. My sister-in-law looked at Diane and her expression shifted slightly. "I'd like to talk about the property transfer," I said. My brother said now wasn't really the time. I told him I thought it actually was. I told him Diane was my attorney, and that she had reviewed the construction records, the permit filings, the financial documentation, and the text message chain that had been forwarded to me by accident. I watched his wife's face process that last part. The text messages. She hadn't known I had those. I said I wasn't there to make a scene. I was there because I had tried to have this conversation at dinner and had been talked over, and I wanted them to understand, clearly, what the situation actually was before anyone signed anything. Diane spoke then. She was calm and factual and used the specific legal language she'd explained to me in advance: equitable interest, co-applicant of record, financial contribution exceeding statutory thresholds. She said I had a documented basis to contest any property transfer, and that we were prepared to file if that became necessary. My brother's wife said that was a very aggressive response to what had been an innocent family conversation. Diane said she understood it might feel that way, and that the goal wasn't aggression, but clarity. I said I was willing to formalize my interest in the property properly. Through the legal process, on paper, with my name on the deed, which was all I had ever wanted, which was what should have happened from the beginning. My brother looked at me for a long moment. He looked the way people look when they realize the version of someone they've been working with in their head is not the actual person standing in front of them. I had been easy for a long time. Easy to overlook, easy to accommodate without ever actually including. I was not easy right now. Some of the guests had drifted slightly closer without meaning to, the natural pull of a gathering when the energy somewhere shifts. My parents were across the yard and hadn't noticed yet. My brother's wife leaned in and said, very quietly, that we should handle this privately, with the family, without attorneys. I said I agreed completely, and that we should have done exactly that before she spent a year convincing my mother to sign my home away without telling me. She didn't have an answer for that. My father came over then, reading the shape of the moment from 20 feet away the way he always had. He looked at Diane, then at me, then at my brother. He said everyone's name once, not as a question. I told him I was sorry, that I didn't want to do this at the party. I told him I needed him and my mother to understand what I had found, and what my rights were, before anything moved forward. I said I wasn't angry at them. I was telling the truth about that. I believed my parents had been managed by someone who was very good at managing people, and I didn't hold it against them the way I might have a year earlier. My father was quiet for a moment. Then he said he thought they needed to sit down together, the four of them, without any party going on around them. My brother's wife started to say something about the guests, about the baby, about the timing. My father said he wasn't talking about right now. He said he was talking about this week. He said he thought some things had gotten confused and he wanted to understand them clearly. That was the moment I knew. Not that I had won, exactly, because it didn't feel like winning, but that the ground had shifted in a way that couldn't be shifted back. 3 weeks later, I sat at my parents' dining room table with Diane on one side and a stack of folders on the other. My brother and his wife sat across from us. My parents sat at the heads of the table, the way they always had, like anchors. Diane walked through the documentation in under an hour. She was thorough and unhurried and never raised her voice. My brother asked questions that started firm and became quieter as the folders kept opening. His wife said very little. My mother kept her hands folded on the table. My father asked Diane to explain the co-applicant permit line twice, slowly, and then sat back and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. At the end, my sister-in-law said that no one had ever intended for me to feel excluded. I said I understood. She said the family's best interest had always been the priority. I said I understood that too, and that my name on the deed was in everyone's best interest, because it reflected reality. My brother said nothing for a while. Then he said he thought that was probably fair. It took 4 more months. There were attorneys on both sides and paperwork that seemed to reproduce itself overnight, and 2 conversations that were hard, in the specific way that family conversations can be hard, where the thing you're actually talking about is underneath the thing you're saying. My brother and his wife did not become different people. I did not expect them to, but they did not contest the filing. Whether that was because Diane had made the legal position clear or because my brother had looked at me across that party and seen something he hadn't expected to find, I couldn't say. Probably both. The day the amended deed came through with my name on it as co-owner, Diane took me to lunch and ordered the good champagne without asking. I sat across from her and felt the particular relief of something finally being true that had always been true, just unrecognized. The house on Clover Ridge Lane was mine. It had always been mine. Now the paper said so. I went home that evening and walked through every room slowly, the way I had the first time, when the walls were fresh and the floors still smelled like stain and the future felt enormous and unwritten. The kitchen, with the open shelving I'd spent 3 weekends installing. The bathroom tiles I'd laid myself after watching 11 tutorial videos and ruining 1 box of grout. The porch where I had stood and cried with relief the day the last coat of paint dried. I paused in the living room and looked at the bookshelves I'd built into the wall on either side of the fireplace. They were full now, books and small plants, and a framed photo of my grandmother, whose hands I had always thought looked something like mine. Strong and useful and not especially elegant. Good hands for building things. I had learned something in the last several months that I hadn't known before, or hadn't been willing to know. That kindness without boundaries isn't kindness. That keeping peace with people who aren't keeping it with you is just a slower way of losing. That documentation is not paranoia. That an attorney is not a nuclear option. That the people who benefit most from you being easy are usually the ones most likely to call you difficult the moment you stop. I also learned something about my parents that softened what could have hardened. They were not conspiring against me. They were people who had been expertly worked, slowly, over many months, by someone who knew how to present self-interest as love. My mother cried when she saw the final paperwork. Not from guilt exactly, but from the particular sadness of realizing she had nearly allowed something real to be taken from someone she loved. My father shook Diane's hand for a long time without saying anything. That was enough. My brother and his wife came to Clover Ridge once after everything was resolved, a Sunday in early spring. It was polite and a little stiff and shorter than it might have been. His wife admired the porch, which I had painted again that season, a slightly warmer white than before. I thanked her. We had coffee and I held my nephew, who had learned to walk and was very pleased with himself about it. When they left, I stood on the porch and watched their car pull out and felt something settle in me that I didn't have a name for. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but something in that direction, something that had room to grow. I started a folder on my laptop that week, a new one, labeled something simple, resources. Inside it, I began collecting information, legal aid contacts for people who couldn't afford an attorney, step-by-step guides for documenting financial contributions to shared family property, templates for the kinds of conversations that most people don't know they're allowed to have until it's almost too late. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with it, but I knew I wasn't the only person who had ever built something beautiful with their own hands and then stood in danger of losing it to someone who had simply decided it belonged to them. The house on Clover Ridge Lane is mine. I built it, and I documented it, and I fought for it, and now my name is on the paper that says so. Some things are worth fighting for. Some people are counting on you to know that before they do. I lean against the porch railing sometimes in the evenings, when the light goes low and warm over the yard, and I think about what it took to be standing here. Not the legal process, not the paperwork, not the party where everything shifted. I think about the moment in my parents' kitchen when I set down the serving spoon and went still and decided to listen instead of dismissing the thing I was hearing. That moment cost me nothing. It gave me everything. If you've ever put everything you have into something and then watched someone try to quietly take it from you, you already know that the hardest part isn't the fight. The hardest part is believing, before the fight begins, that you're allowed to have one. I hope you know you are. What would you do if you discovered the people closest to you had been working against you for months without you knowing? Tell me in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, I'd love for you to share it with someone who needs to hear it.